dead of night, April 26, 1986. Inside reactor number 4, what was supposed to be a marvel of Soviet engineering is just humming along. But in just a few moments, it's not just going to fail. It's going to tear a radioactive scar right across the face of the planet, one that's still there today.
And you know the crazy part? It all kicked off with a simple safety check, a routine one. But this one test was about to set off a chain reaction that would unleash an invisible poison. A poison that didn't just stay in one place, but spread across continents, affecting people for generations.
So stick with me, because in the next few minutes, we're going to break down exactly what happened that night, second by second. We'll look at the fatal flaws in the reactor's design, flaws the operators themselves didn't even know about. And we're going to look at the very real, devastating human cost. This is the story of Chernobyl.
Okay, so let's set the scene. April 25th, 1986. And here's the biggest, most tragic irony of this whole story. This disaster, it didn't start with some emergency, some panic situation. No, it started with a completely standard, scheduled safety check. They'd even done it before. The entire point was to make the plant safer, not to blow it up.
So, what was this test all about? Well, the idea behind it was actually pretty smart, at least on paper. They wanted to know, if the power plant had a total blackout, could they use the leftover energy from the giant spinning turbines to keep the crucial water pumps going? It's kind of like when you stop pedaling a bike but the wheels keep spinning for a bit. They just needed that momentum to generate power for about 60 seconds, just long enough for the backup generators to kick in. You see? This test was literally designed to prevent a meltdown, not cause one.
But the whole thing was a mess from the get-go. They started powering down the reactor, but then, bam, the local power grid manager calls and says, hey, I need you to wait. This delayed the test for almost 10 hours. So now you've got a tired night shift coming in, having to pick up where the last crew left off. And almost immediately they run into a huge problem. The reactor's power suddenly plummets to almost zero, which puts it in an extremely unstable state. I mean, this was a condition that the rulebook screamed you should never operate in. But the test went ahead anyway.
Now, for a long time, the official story was simple. The operators messed up. And look, they absolutely made some mistakes, no doubt about it. But that's not the whole story, not even close. The real truth, which came out much later, was way more sinister. The RBMK reactor itself, it had a secret, a fatal flaw baked right into its design.
Okay, this is the absolute core of the problem, so listen close. In most nuclear reactors, there's a natural failsafe. If things get too hot, steam bubbles form, and those bubbles actually slow down the nuclear reaction. It's like a built-in brake. Simple, right? Well, the RBMK reactor at Chernobyl did the exact opposite, especially when running at low power. In that reactor, more heat meant more steam, and more steam sped up the reaction, which created more heat, which created more steam. You see where this is going. It was a terrifying runaway feedback loop. It's like having a car where hitting the brake pedal actually slams on the accelerator.
And believe it or not, it gets worse. It wasn't just one flaw. Get this. The control rods, the very things designed to shut the reactor down in an emergency, had a design flaw of their own. Their tips were made of graphite, and when you first inserted them, for a few critical seconds, they would actually increase the reactor's power before shutting it down. Can you imagine that? A shutdown button that first floors the gas. And the worst part? The designers knew. They knew about these problems. But in the Soviet system, with its obsession with secrecy and a total lack of what we'd call a safety culture, that information never made it to the guys in the control room. They had no idea they were flying blind.
So let's go back to that control room. It's now 1:23 in the morning. The test officially begins. The reactor is unstable. Key safety systems have been manually disabled as part of the test plan, and the operators are working with a machine whose deadliest secrets are hidden from them. It was the perfect storm. They were about to light a match, and they had no idea the whole room was filled with gas. Just 40 seconds, that's all it took. 40 seconds into the test, they see the power starting to surge uncontrollably. They do the only thing they can do, the thing they were trained to do. They slam the emergency shutdown button, the AZ5 button, the scram. This was supposed to instantly drive all the control rods into the reactor and stop the reaction dead in its tracks. It was the absolute right thing to do at the absolute worst possible moment.
And this is the heart of the tragedy. As those control rods began to lower into the core, those faulty graphite tips did their dirty work. They caused one final, unimaginable power spike. The button that was supposed to save them was the very thing that triggered the explosion. In less than a second, the reactor's power level shot up to more than 100 times its normal operating level. 100 times.
what followed was just apocalyptic. Two massive explosions ripped through the building. The first was a steam explosion that just tore the reactor to pieces. The second, just a couple of seconds later, was even bigger. It launched the reactor's 1,000-ton lid, this massive concrete and steel shield, up into the night sky like a coin. The core was now completely exposed, open to the air, and the graphite inside, now white-hot, ignited, starting a fire that would burn for days, spewing a column of deadly radiation straight into the atmosphere.
And as the alarms blared, the first firefighters arrived. You have to understand, they thought they were just responding to a roof fire at a power plant. A bad fire for sure, but a fire nonetheless. They had no idea. No idea they weren't running towards flames, but straight into an invisible storm of radiation pouring out of the reactor's glowing, open heart. The levels of radiation were just astronomical. So high they were literally off the scale of the dosimeters they had. For many of those first responders, they received a lethal dose within minutes of arriving. 28 of those firefighters and plant workers died in the following weeks and months from acute radiation syndrome. A truly horrific death. They were heroes, and they paid the ultimate price.
And the scale of this thing, it's just hard to wrap your head around. Okay, so 2 people died in the initial blast itself, but then you have 134 people confirmed to have suffered from acute radiation syndrome. And then there's the city of Pripyat, right next door. Almost 50,000 people, evacuated. Their lives packed into a few hours, told they'd be back in a few days, they never returned. And in the long run, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people forced to leave their homes for good.
And this fallout, it didn't just stay there. For 10 straight days, that burning reactor was like a volcano, just pumping radioactive material into the sky. And the wind did the rest, carrying it all over Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and then across Scandinavia and a huge chunk of Europe. One of the worst things was radioactive iodine. Your body can't tell the difference between it and normal iodine, so it just absorbs it and it collects in the thyroid gland. For children and teenagers, this was devastating. It led to thousands and thousands of cases of thyroid cancer in the years after.
But you know, the damage wasn't just physical. A UN report later pointed out something really important. For millions of people, the biggest health problem wasn't the radiation itself, but the fear of it. The psychological stress of living with an invisible enemy, of not knowing if your food is safe, if your children are safe, that became a health crisis all on its own. It's a wound you can't see, and for so many, it is never really healed.
So the explosion itself was over in a matter of seconds. But the shockwaves from it, they're still being felt today. This event changed everything. At first, the Soviet Union had a very simple, very convenient story. Blame the operators. It was all their fault. But as scientists from around the world started to dig in, the real story emerged. The truth was, the reactor's design was fundamentally flawed. The operators weren't the villains. They were put in an impossible situation, like pilots trying to land a plane with controls that did the opposite of what they were supposed to, with no one having bothered to tell them.
So how do you even begin to clean up a mess like this? Well, it took an army. Literally, up to 600,000 people, soldiers, miners, engineers, volunteers, they were all called in. They became known as the liquidators. These were the people who ran onto the roof to throw radioactive graphite back into the core, who dug tunnels underneath it, who built a first giant concrete sarcophagus to seal the reactor off from the world. It was an act of incredible bravery, and so many of them sacrificed their own health to protect millions of others.
The fallout, you see, it wasn't just radioactive, it was political. When the radiation cloud hit Sweden, the Soviets couldn't hide it anymore. The disaster proved to the entire world just how dangerous their culture of secrecy was. It forced a total rethink of nuclear safety. It created new international rules, new levels of transparency. After Chernobyl, the world realized that a nuclear accident anywhere is a nuclear accident everywhere.
So when you really look at it, Chernobyl wasn't just a reactor exploding, it was a total system failure, a failure of design, a failure of a culture of secrecy that cared more about appearances than people's lives, and a failure to respect an invisible power we had unlocked. It was a perfect storm of all those things, and we are still dealing with the consequences.
You know, when you think about this story, there are so many different kinds of terror. There's the explosion itself, that sudden, violent moment. Then there's the radiation, the silent, invisible killer that lingers for generations. And then there's the silence that came after, the empty city, the buried secrets. I'm curious what you think. What's the most terrifying part of the Chernobyl story for you? The explosion, the radiation, or the silence? Let me know down in the comments.